I am Alex, a college student working on my thesis. I never anticipated that my life would take such a complicated turn. It has been a grueling process, filled with long nights and stressful days. However, I was unaware that the real challenge would not be my academic work, but rather an unexpected my name is Alex, and I am currently working on my thesis as a college student. The process has been arduous, involving long nights and stressful days. However, I was not anticipating the additional challenge that I would face at home. The sequence of events began on a Friday night. I had been working extensively on my thesis throughout the week, and by the time I returned home, I was extremely fatigued. The house was quiet when I arrived. The soft glow of the kitchen light spilling into the hallway was the only illumination. "Alex, is that you, Sarah?" The situation at home was as follows. It all started on a Friday night. I had been working late into the night to make progress on my thesis. By the time I arrived home, I was completely exhausted. The house was quiet when I entered. The soft glow of the kitchen light spilled into the hallway. "Alex, is that you?" My stepmom called out from the kitchen. "Yeah, it's me," I replied, my voice rough with exhaustion. I trudged into the kitchen to find Sarah at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. My dad, Robert, was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. "You look tired, son," he said, glancing up at me over his reading glasses. My stepmother called out from the kitchen. "Yeah, it's me," I replied, my voice rough with exhaustion. I walked into the kitchen and found Sarah at the stove, stirring something that smelled delicious. My father, Robert, was sitting at the table reading the newspaper. "You look tired, son," he said, glancing up at me over his reading glasses. I nodded, running a hand through my disheveled hair. "This thesis is exhausting me," I said. Sarah turned from the stove, concerned. "Have you been eating properly? You look pale. Are you eating enough?" she asked. "I'm fine," I assured her, though my stomach chose that moment to growl loudly. "I'll sit down. Dinner's almost ready." Sarah laughed softly. I nodded, brushing my hair back. "This thesis is exhausting me," Sarah said, her face showing concern. "Have you been eating properly? You look pale." "I'm fine," I assured her, though my stomach made a noise. "I'll sit down. Dinner's almost ready," Sarah said, laughing softly. I shook my head. "Thanks, but I think I'm just going to head to bed. I'm completely wiped out." "Are you sure?" Sarah asked, her brow furrowed. "You really should eat something." "I'm sure I said already," I said, backing out of the kitchen. "I just need sleep. Good night, guys." I heard them both call out good nights as I climbed the stairs to. I declined, expressing that I was exhausted and in need of sleep. I proceeded to my room and immediately fell asleep. I am uncertain of the duration of my sleep, but I became aware of a presence in my room. In my state of semi-asleep, I assumed it was just a dream. However, I felt a gentle touch on my hand, and my confused mind struggled to comprehend the situation. I immediately felt a sense of ease and relaxation wash over me as I drifted into a deep state of slumber. However, my body's natural inclination towards rest and rejuvenation was suddenly interrupted by a distinct sensation of something cold touching my skin. This abrupt stimulus caused my body to react instinctively, tensing up in a state of heightened alertness. Despite my fatigue and the urge to surrender to the embrace of slumber, I found myself unable to open my eyes or move. The subsequent events that unfolded are still a subject of ongoing processing and reflection for me. I distinctly felt a hand. I felt my shirt being lifted slightly, and something cold touched my skin. I was taken aback, and my body reacted instinctively, tensing up. However, I was exhausted and eager for sleep, so I remained closed-eyed and immobile. The subsequent events are still unclear to me. I felt a hand gently caressing me in a manner that was clearly inappropriate for a family member. My body responded, and my mind reeled with confusion and dismay. I wanted to inquire about the situation, but my fatigue prevented me from speaking. Part of me suspected this was merely a vivid, strange dream, but the experience felt authentic. I was awoken by a sensation that was both intense and, to my shame, pleasurable. I was overwhelmed by a mix of panic and arousal as my body responded to the touch, even though my mind screamed that this was wrong. I felt like I couldn't take any more, like I was on the brink of. I was startled by the sensation, which I couldn't explain as a figment of my imagination. The touch became more intimate, and I felt a mix of panic and, to my shame, pleasure. My body was responding to the gentle caresses, even as my mind screamed that this was wrong. Just when I thought I couldn't take any more, I forced myself to wake up to confront what was happening. It stopped. I heard soft footsteps retreating, and then silence. I lay there, my heart pounding, my mind racing. What had just happened? Who had been in my room? I wanted to get up to investigate, but my body was still heavy with exhaustion. Before I knew it, I had drifted. I was compelled to address the events of the night before it was too late. I was greeted by the sight of Sarah, who appeared to be preoccupied with culinary endeavors. I inquired about her well-being, and she replied with a cheerful expression and a question about my needs. I noticed a change in her demeanor, but I couldn't place what had occurred. The following morning, I rose and proceeded downstairs, still experiencing the effects of fatigue and stress. The aroma of coffee and bacon guided me to the kitchen, where I found Sarah preparing breakfast. I found Sarah busy at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead," she said cheerfully. "You must have really needed that rest. How are you feeling?" I stared at her, searching for any sign that something was different, that something had changed between us, but she seemed completely normal, humming as she flipped pancakes on the stovetop. "Good morning, Sarah." She was busy at the stove. "Good morning, sleepyhead. You must have really needed that rest. How are you feeling?" I stared at her, searching for any indication that something was different or that something had changed between us. However, she seemed completely normal, humming as she flipped pancakes on the griddle. "I'm okay," I said slowly. "Where's Dad?" "He had an early meeting with a client." "Oh." "He had an early meeting with a client," Sarah replied, sliding a plate of food in front of me. "Eat up. You need your strength for all that studying." As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah bustled around the kitchen, chatting about her plans for the day. "Griddle, I'm fine," I said, attempting to maintain composure. "Where is Dad?" "He had an early meeting with a client." "He's currently occupied with a client," Sarah replied, setting a plate of food in front of me. "Eat. You need your strength for all that studying." As I ate, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. Sarah moved around the kitchen, chatting about her plans for the day, but I barely heard her. My mind was preoccupied with the events of the previous night. Had it really happened? If it had it been Sarah who had come into my room? I couldn't bring myself to ask. What if I was wrong? What if it had just been a dream? The thought of accusing my stepmom of something so inappropriate made me feel uneasy. I was unable to concentrate on my breakfast, and so I refrained from commenting on the events of the previous night. I thanked Sarah and returned to my room to resume work on my thesis. However, I was unable to focus on my work, as my thoughts were preoccupied with the memory of the previous night's events. Over the next few days, I struggled to regain my composure and balance my emotions. I was preoccupied with a sense of unease, exacerbated by the ongoing work on my thesis and the conflicting emotions triggered by my interactions with Sarah. She maintained her usual demeanor, seemingly undisturbed by the circumstances. It was not until the following Friday that the situation reached a critical point. I had taken an early class departure and hurried. I was working on my thesis defense the following day, so I had gotten out of class early and was working at home. I was so focused on my work that I didn't hear Sarah come into my room. "Alex," her voice made me jump. "Sorry, I didn't mean to startle you. I brought you some snacks because you've been working so hard." I turned to face her, my heart pounding. She was standing. I was working on my thesis defense the following day, and I was completely focused on my task. I didn't notice Sarah's entrance. "Alex, I'm sorry I startled you. I thought you needed some snacks because you've been working so hard." I turned to face her, my heart pounding. She was standing there with a plate of cookies, smiling at me like always. However, there was something different in her eyes, or was I imagining it? "Thank you," I managed to say, taking the plate from her instead of leaving Sarah perched on the edge of my bed. "How's the thesis coming along?" "It's fine," I said, struggling to maintain composure. I took the plate of cookies from her and said, "Thank you. How are things going with the thesis?" "It's fine." I struggled to maintain my composure. "I'm just really stressed about the defense tomorrow." Sarah's face softened with sympathy. "Oh, honey, you're going to do great. You've worked so hard." Before I knew what was happening, she had moved closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through me, reminding me of that night. I was able to maintain my composure, although I was anxious about the upcoming defense. Sarah's expression softened with sympathy. "You're going to do great. You've worked so hard." I was aware of the situation. She had moved closer, her hand resting on my shoulder. The touch sent a jolt through me, reminding me of that night. I could no longer endure it. "I had to know Sarah," I said, my voice shaking. "That night last week, did you? Was that you in my room?" The moment the words left my mouth, I saw the change in her face. The friendly smile faltered, replaced by a look of shock. "Was it guilt?" Alex began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was compelled to inquire about Sarah's well-being. "Was that you in my room last night?" I asked, my voice expressing a range of emotions. "Did you come into my room?" I inquired, seeing a change in her face. Her smile faltered, and she appeared shocked. "Alex, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. "I don't know what to say," I replied, recognizing that it had not been a dream. "It really happened. My stepmom came into my room that night and touched me in a way that crossed every boundary." We sat in silence for what felt like an eternity, the weight of this revelation hanging heavy between us. I was at a loss for words and had to collect myself before I could respond. I was conflicted. Part of me was angry, part of me was confused, and part of me was curious. "We need to talk about this," I finally said, breaking the silence. "Sarah, I think we need to talk about this. We can talk about it later, though. Your father will be home soon, and you need to focus on your thesis." I was torn between anger, confusion, and curiosity. "We need to talk about this," I finally said, breaking the silence. Sarah nodded, her eyes brimming with unshed tears. "We do, but not now. Your father will be home soon, and you need to focus on your thesis." "Defense. Can we talk tomorrow after your defense?" I wanted to protest, to demand answers now, but she was right. I couldn't afford to be distracted, not with my entire academic future hanging in the balance. "Okay," I agree reluctantly. "Tomorrow." Sarah stood up, smoothing down her skirt with trembling hands. I apologize, Alex, but I never meant for this to happen. I'll explain everything tomorrow, I promise." As Sarah left my room, I turned back to my computer. My mind reeled. How was I supposed to focus on my thesis now? How was I supposed to face my dad at dinner knowing what I knew? But I had to try. I had worked too hard for too long. To Alex, please know that I never intended for this situation to arise. I will provide a full explanation tomorrow. As she departed my room, I turned back to my computer. My mind was in disarray. How could I possibly focus on my thesis now? How could I face my father at dinner with what I knew? But I had to try. I had worked too hard for too long to let this derail me now. I took a deep breath and pushed all thoughts of Sarah from that night to the back of my mind. I returned to my work. I was unaware that this was just the beginning of a complicated and emotional journey that would test the boundaries of family love and morality. As I sat there trying to focus on academic theories and research methodologies, I had no idea how much my life was about to change. The next day loomed before me, filled with the promise of academic challenge and personal confrontation. I was standing on the precipice of something huge, something that would alter the course of my life forever. At present, my primary focus was on preparing for my thesis defense and for the challenging conversation I anticipated as nightfall approached and the house settled into silence. Tension mounted as I lay in bed, contemplating the impending day. Would the results of my efforts be aligned with my expectations? Would I possess the fortitude to confront the reality, whatever its nature might be? As the morning of my thesis defense arrived, I felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. On the one hand, I was eager to present the work I had dedicated months of my life to. On the other hand, I couldn't shake the anxiety about the conversation waiting for me at home. I barely tasted the breakfast Sarah had made. As the day of my thesis defense approached, I felt a mixture of anticipation and apprehension. On one hand, I was enthusiastic about presenting the result of my months of hard work. On the other hand, I was worried about what would happen at home. I barely ate breakfast, which was prepared by Sarah. She tried to be cheerful, but I could see that she was nervous. When she thought I wasn't paying attention, she looked worried. "Good luck today, son," my dad said as he left for work, patting me on the shoulder. "You've got this." If only he knew the full story. Despite the seemingly normal atmosphere during breakfast, there was a palpable tension in the air. Passage of the defense was swift, and I proceeded to present my research, address questions, and defend my conclusions. Remarkably, I managed to maintain focus despite personal challenges. Upon conclusion, my advisor offered congratulations, acknowledging the performance despite the evident stress. Despite the external appearance of composure, I experienced a sense of impending doom as I made my way home from the meeting. Sarah was waiting for me when I arrived, sitting at the kitchen table with 2 cups of steaming coffee in front of her. She looked up as I entered, her face displaying a mask of anxiety and remorse. "Alex, I'm impressed with your work." I should have been elated, but I felt a sense of impending doom. When I arrived home, Sarah was waiting for me at the kitchen table. She had 2 mugs of steaming coffee in front of her. She looked up at me with a mask of anxiety and remorse. "How did it go?" she asked softly. "Fine," I replied, my voice tight. "That's wonderful, Alex. I knew you would. Can we not do this?" She cut me off, unable to bear the pretense of normal any longer. "We need to talk about what happened." Sarah nodded, her shoulders sagging. "You're right. Please sit down." I took the seat. "How did it go?" she inquired gently. "Fine," I replied, my voice laced with tension. "I passed. That's wonderful," she said, her tone a mixture of relief and admiration. "Alex, I knew you would. Can we not do this?" I interrupted, unable to sustain the facade of normalcy any longer. "We need to talk about what happened." Sarah nodded, her shoulders slumping. "You're right. Please sit down." I took the seat across from her, my hands resting on the warm mug she had prepared for me. For a long moment, neither of us spoke. I finally broke the silence. "Why did you come into my room that night, Sarah?" She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and met my gaze. "I don't have a good answer, Alex. I've been," she began, her voice trailing off as she searched for the words. Across from her, I took a sip of my tea and asked, "Why did you come into my room that night?" Sarah closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and met my gaze. "I don't have a good answer, Alex. I've been asking myself the same question ever since it happened." "Try," I insisted. "I deserve an explanation." She nodded her fingers, tracing the rim of her mug. "You're right. You do. The truth is, I've been struggling for a while now. Your father is a good man, but he's been so distant lately. Always working, always distracted." I inquired about the reasons behind her actions, to which she agreed that I was entitled to an explanation. She nodded her head in agreement, her fingers tracing the rim of her cup. "You're right. You are. The truth is, I've been struggling for some time. Your father is a good man, but he's been distant lately. He's always working and distracted. I've been feeling lonely and unappreciated." I listened intently, my emotions a swirling mess of empathy and discomfort. "That night," Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper, "I'd had a bit too much wine. I was feeling reckless. I suppose I saw your light on and thought maybe we could talk. But when I got to your room, you were already. I have been feeling lonely and unappreciated as of late. I listened to my emotions, which were a swirling mess of empathy and discomfort. Sarah continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I'd had a bit too much wine. I was feeling reckless. I suppose I saw your light on and thought maybe we could talk. But when I got to your room, you were already asleep. She paused, taking a shaky breath. I don't know what came over me. You looked so peaceful, so I don't know. Before I knew what I was doing, you know what happened next. I sat there, trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to be angry, to lash out at her for violating my trust and personal space. But she paused, breathing heavily. I don't know what came over me. You looked so peaceful, so I don't know. Before I knew what I was doing, you know what happened next. I sat there trying to process her words. Part of me wanted to be angry, to lash out at her for violating my trust and personal space. But another part of me saw the pain in her eyes and the genuine remorse in her voice. I'm so sorry, Alex, Sarah said, tears spilling down her cheeks. I'm sorry for what I did. I betrayed your trust and your father's. If you want me to leave, I'll understand. The thought of her leaving, of our family falling apart, hit me like, despite my reservations, I realized that I didn't want her to leave. I told her that I didn't know how to move past this, but I wanted to try to trust her again. Sarah looked at me, her eyes conveying a mixture of hope and fear. I told her that I would do whatever it took to make things right, and she said that she would do the same. I want to do this, and I'm willing to do whatever it takes to make it right. We talked for hours, and I learned more about her feelings of loneliness and neglect in her marriage. I also shared my own insecurities and the confusing mix of emotions her actions had stirred in me. As the afternoon wore on, I found myself feeling a strange sense of. We conversed at length on the subject, and I was able to share my perspective on the matter. Sarah elaborated on her feelings of loneliness and neglect in her marriage, and I shared my own insecurities and the emotions her actions had stirred in me. As the afternoon progressed, I found myself feeling a sense of closeness to my stepmother, though not in the inappropriate way I had experienced that night. For the first time, I was seeing her as a real person with her own flaws and struggles. As our conversation drew to a close, I inquired about what we should tell Dad. Sarah's face fell, and I could see that she was uncertain. Part of me thinks I had a newfound perspective on my stepmother, seeing her as a real person with her own flaws and struggles. As our conversation concluded, I inquired about telling Dad. Sarah's face showed a mix of uncertainty and apprehension. Part of me felt she deserved to know the truth, while another part feared the potential impact on our family. I finished explaining, and she nodded, looking distressed. I love your father, Alex, despite everything. I understand the difficulty of hurting him like this. I could feel her dilemma acutely. The secret we shared felt like an invisible bond between us. Sarah understood the professional and personal challenges involved in the situation. Alex admitted that he loved her father, despite their history. He acknowledged the emotional impact of their secret on their relationship. Sarah suggested that they discuss the underlying issues with her father, including her feelings of neglect and the distance between them. Alex agreed that this would be a step forward, although he couldn't predict the outcome. Sarah acknowledged that it might prevent future issues and that they should take things one day at a time. She committed to improving her communication with Alex's father, and he promised to be more open with her. They agreed to be more open with each other and to address any feelings or issues as they arose. As she began preparing dinner, she paused and looked at me, conveying a mixture of gratitude and lingering guilt. Thank you, Alex, for listening and for not hating me. I understand that I do not deserve your forgiveness, and I do not hate you, she said, truthfully. I am still processing everything, but I do not hate you. She nodded, giving me a watery smile. As I drifted off to sleep that night, my mind lingered on our conversation. I felt a complex array of emotions, including a sense of relief at having addressed our issues, lingering uncertainty about my own feelings, and a newfound understanding of the intricacies of adult relationships. However, a nagging sense of guilt persisted. I considered the implications of my decision to keep part of the incident confidential. Was I compromising my father's trust? Was I complicit in something I shouldn't be? These questions lingered in my mind as I drifted off to sleep. The following weeks were a period of adjustment, as Sarah and I tried to maintain normalcy while navigating our new reality. We were careful to avoid being alone together for too long, in order to maintain a respectful distance between us. I threw myself into my schoolwork, using it as a distraction from the turmoil at home. Sarah made efforts to reconnect with my dad, true to her word. I came home to find them cooking dinner together or planning weekend activities. Despite our efforts to maintain a professional distance, I noticed Sarah and my father spending time together, which led me to suspect that they were rekindling their relationship. I began to feel uneasy, and I overheard Sarah looking at me with a distant expression. I also had memories of that night, and I felt ashamed and confused. The situation reached a crisis point about a month after our conversation. I came home early from class one day. Despite my efforts, I found myself unable to avoid the fact that Sarah and I had not been spending much time together as of late. I had the impression that she was struggling with some sort of personal issue. One day, I came home early from class to find her alone in the house. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. I was surprised by her reaction to my entrance. I explained that I had canceled class, and she asked me about my work. I could tell that she was upset. One day, I found Sarah alone in the house. She was in the living room, curled up on the couch with a book. "Oh, I'm sorry. I didn't expect you home so early. Professor canceled class," I explained, hovering awkwardly in the doorway. "Where's Dad working late?" Sarah asked, her tone edgy. I could hear the frustration in her voice and see the slump of her shoulders. Without thinking, I moved to sit beside her on the couch. Our things weren't going well. I asked her hesitantly, "I'm trying, Alex. I really am. But sometimes I wonder if it's enough, if we're just too far gone." I felt a pang of sympathy for her. I felt a sense of sympathy for her, despite everything I knew about her genuine efforts to make things work. "I'm sorry," I said, reaching out to pat her hand comfortingly. The moment my skin touched hers, I felt a jolt of electricity. Our eyes met, and suddenly the air between us felt charged with an intensity that scared me. Sarah must have felt it too, because I was aware that she was genuinely trying to make things work. I apologized, and, reaching out to Pat, took her hand in comfort. The moment my skin touched hers, I felt a jolt of electricity. Our eyes met, and suddenly the air between us felt charged with an intensity that made me uncomfortable. Sarah must have felt it too because she quickly pulled her hand away. "I should start dinner," she said, her voice shaky as she hurried to the kitchen. I sat there, my heart pounding. What was that? Why did I react that way to a simple touch? I retreated to my room, my mind in chaos. I thought we'd moved past that night. I quickly pulled her hand away, standing up abruptly. "I should start dinner," she said, her voice shaky as she hurried to the kitchen. I sat there, my heart pounding. What was that? Why did I react that way to a simple touch? I retreated to my room, my mind in chaos. I thought we had moved past that night, that we had put it behind us. But clearly, there were still unresolved feelings, still a dangerous attraction simmering beneath the surface. That night, I lay awake for hours, grappling with my conscience. I knew what I was feeling was wrong. Sarah was my stepmom, my dad's wife, but I couldn't deny the pull I felt towards her, the way my body responded to her. I was awake for hours, thinking about my feelings and the situation. I knew that what I was feeling was wrong, but I couldn't deny the attraction I felt towards Sarah. I thought about my dad, who was unaware of the issues at home. I thought about Sarah, who was trapped in a dying marriage, and I thought about myself, caught in the middle of it all. I realized that I was woefully unprepared. As dawn broke, I made a decision that I could no longer continue living in this manner, constantly walking on eggshells in my own home and continually fighting these inappropriate feelings. Something had to change. With a heavy heart, I began to pack a bag. Perhaps some time away, some distance from this situation would be beneficial. As dawn broke, I came to the realization that the status quo was no longer tenable. I began to pack a bag, intending to take some time away from the situation. This would allow me to clear my head and focus on finishing my last few classes. As I zipped up my backpack, I heard movement in the hallway. Sarah was probably starting her morning routine. I took a deep breath, preparing myself for the conversation ahead. I had to tell her I was leaving. I needed to gather my thoughts, and I was on my way to the kitchen. I was still in my robe, with hair that was a bit disheveled from sleep. My eyes widened as I saw my packed bag and the determined set of my jaw. "Alex, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier. I was on my way to a friend's house to focus on finishing up my last few classes. As I zipped up my backpack, I heard movement in the hallway. Sarah was up, probably starting her morning routine. I took a deep breath, ready to face whatever came next. With one last look around my room, I opened the door, ready to explain why it wasn't going to be easy, but it was necessary. Little did I know that the most challenging part of this whole ordeal was yet to come. As I stepped into the hallway, backpack slung over my shoulder, I nearly collided with Sarah. I explained that, although it would be difficult, it was necessary. After surveying my surroundings one final time, I opened the door and prepared to face the next step. I was unaware that the most challenging part of this ordeal was yet to come. As I stepped into the hallway, backpack slung over my shoulder, I nearly collided with Sarah. She was on her way to the kitchen, still in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. Her eyes widened as she took in my packed bag and the determined set of my jaw. "Alex, what's going on?" she asked, her voice tight with concern. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier. She was on her way to the kitchen, still in her robe, hair tousled from sleep. Her eyes widened as she took in my packed bag and the determined set of my jaw. "Alex," she asked, her voice tight with concern. "What's going on?" I took a deep breath, steadying myself for the conversation ahead. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steadier. "I think it's best if I stay with a friend for a while." Sarah's face fell with a mix of understanding and dismay. "Oh, Alex," she sighed. "Is this because of yesterday? Because of us?" I nodded, unable to meet her eyes. "It's not just yesterday. It's everything. I can't keep pretending. I believe it would be best if I stayed with a friend for a while." Sarah's countenance conveyed a blend of comprehension and dismay. "Alex, I'm sorry to bother you, but I need some time to think. Is this related to yesterday's events? Is it due to our relationship?" I nodded, averting her gaze. "It's not just yesterday. It's everything. I can't continue to pretend. Everything seems normal, but it's not. I need some time to process things." She tentatively reached out to touch my arm, then relented, her hand falling listlessly to her side. "I understand," she said gently. "But please, can we discuss this first? Your father will be devastated if you just leave. The mention of this will upset him." Everything seemed normal, but it wasn't. I needed some time to gather my thoughts. She reached out to touch my arm, but then reconsidered. Her hand fell to her side. "I understand," she said gently. "But please, can we talk about this first? Your father will be devastated if you just disappear." I felt a pang of guilt when I heard my dad's voice in my ear. I hadn't thought about how my sudden departure would affect him. "Okay," I agree reluctantly. "We can talk." We made our way to the kitchen. The tension between us was palpable. Sarah was busy making coffee. Her movements were jerky and uncertain. I sat at the table. I felt a pang of guilt as I hurried to leave, not having considered how my sudden departure would affect my father. "Okay, we can talk," I said, though I was reluctant. We made our way to the kitchen, where the tension between us was palpable. Sarah was busy making coffee, her movements jerky and uncertain. I sat at the table, my backpack weighing down my feet. Sarah set a steaming mug in front of me. We heard the front door open, and my father's voice called out, "I'm home." Sarah and I exchanged panicked looks. He wasn't supposed to be back yet. My father appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tired face breaking into a smile as he saw us. "Well, he said. "We were surprised to see my father home early on a Saturday." He appeared in the kitchen doorway, his tired face breaking into a smile as he saw us. "Well, this is a nice surprise. Both of you up early." His smile faltered as he took in the scene. My packed bag, Sarah's tear-stained face, the heavy silence between us. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. In that moment, looking at my father's confused face, I knew we couldn't keep lying. The weight of our secret was tearing us apart. "It was a pleasant surprise to see you both up early on a Saturday." He looked at me with a pained expression, his smile faltering as he took in the scene. My packed bag, Sarah's tear-stained face, the heavy silence between us. "What's going on?" he asked, his voice laced with concern. In that moment, I looked at my dad's confused face, and I knew we couldn't keep lying. The weight of our secret was tearing us apart, and if we had any hope of moving forward, we had to come clean. "Dad," I said, my voice shaking slightly, "we need to talk." The next hour was one of the most difficult of my life. We sat around the kitchen table, cups of coffee growing cold as we laid everything bare. Sarah and I took turns explaining what had happened that night, the confusion and guilt. "Dad, I need to talk. We need to talk about what happened that night, the confusion and guilt that followed, and the unresolved tension that has been simmering ever since. I need you to listen, and I need you to hear everything we're about to say." My father listened in stunned silence. His face was a mask of shock and hurt. When we finished, he stood up abruptly, pacing the kitchen with his hands clenched at his sides. "How could you?" he finally said, his voice raw with emotion. He looked at Sarah, pain etched in every line of his face. Subsequently, the tension that had been brewing since my father's listening in a state of astonishment was brought to the forefront. His countenance conveyed a blend of dismay and distress. Upon completion, he rose abruptly, pacing the kitchen with clenched hands. "How could you?" he eventually uttered, his voice tinged with raw emotion. Sarah's countenance bore the imprint of profound distress. "How could you do this to us?" she inquired, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry, Robert. I never intended for these events to transpire. I was feeling isolated and overlooked, but that's no justification for my actions. They were inexcusable." My father turned to face me, and the distress evident in his gaze was almost overwhelming. "Alex, why didn't you inform me?" he asked, his voice tinged with emotion. I felt tears pricking at my own eyes. "I apologize, Dad. I was confused and scared. I didn't want to hurt you." He laughed bitterly. "Well, that worked out great, didn't it?" The silence that followed was deafening. We sat there, three people who loved each other, who had hurt each other, trying to navigate the wreckage of our family. Finally, my dad spoke again, his voice calmer but still strained. "I need some. I apologize, Dad. I was perplexed and distressed. I did not intend to cause you harm." He laughed bitterly. "Well, that worked out well, didn't it?" The silence that followed was palpable. We sat there, three individuals who loved each other yet had hurt each other, trying to navigate the aftermath of our family. Finally, my dad spoke again, his voice calmer but still strained. "I need some time to process this. I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days." "Robert, please," Sarah began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not making any decisions right now. I just need space to think," he said as he left to pack a bag. Sarah and I sat in silence, the weight of our actions pressing down on us. "I'm so sorry, Alex," Sarah whispered. "This is all my fault. I'm going to stay at a hotel for a few days." "Robert, please," Sarah began, but he held up a hand to stop her. "I'm not making any decisions right now. I just need space to think," he said as he left to pack a bag. Sarah and I sat in silence, the weight of our actions pressing down on us. "I'm so sorry, Alex," Sarah whispered. "I'm responsible for my actions. I could have spoken up sooner. Dad could have been more attentive. We all played a part in this." The next few weeks were a blur of tense conversations, tears, and soul-searching. My dad came back after a few days, and we began the painful process of rebuilding our relationships. It wasn't easy. There were instances of anger, blame, and despair, but we gradually began to heal. My parents began couples therapy, addressing years of unspoken resentments and miscommunications. I sought the guidance of my own therapist, addressing my complex emotions and learning healthier ways of managing stress and confusion. Sarah and I also engaged in collaborative work. We redefined our relationship, setting clear boundaries and ensuring that we were never alone together for extended periods. We openly discussed our feelings, acknowledged the inappropriate attraction, and committed to never acting on it again. It was a long, difficult process, but things gradually improved. My dad made efforts to be more present and show. Sarah expressed her desire for appreciation, and Sarah dedicated herself to rebuilding trust with my father and me. I concentrated on completing school, establishing an independent life, and creating a life outside of the family drama. I went on dates, made new friends, and started planning for my future career. As time passed, I found myself feeling lighter and more at peace. The guilt and Sarah's appreciation was essential in rebuilding trust with my father and me. I prioritized finishing school and establishing an independent life. I went on dates, made new friends, and started planning my future career. As time passed, I felt more at ease and gained a new understanding of the intricacies of adult relationships and the significance of open communication. About a year after that pivotal night, we sat down for a family dinner. As I looked around the table, I was impressed by our progress. My dad and Sarah were holding hands and sharing laughter. The tension that once permeated our home had dissipated, and a newfound warmth and openness characterized our interactions. I expressed my pride in our progress, noting that we could have succumbed to the challenges we faced, but we persevered, emerging stronger. My father smiled and reached out to embrace me, acknowledging the difficulty of the journey but celebrating our progress. I'm grateful we found our way through it. Sarah nodded, her eyes shining with unshed tears. I never thought we'd get here, but I'm so thankful we did. I love you both so much. As we continued our meal, talking and laughing, I felt a sense of peace wash over me. We weren't perfect, and we'd made mistakes, hurt each other in ways that once we had found the strength to forgive, to heal, and to rebuild. I reflected on my journey over the past year and wished I could convey to him that things would eventually work out, that the pain and confusion would subside, and that, with honesty, effort, and love, even the deepest wounds can heal. I reflected on the journey of the past year, during which I had found the capacity to forgive, heal, and rebuild. I thought back to the confused and scared version of myself from a year ago and wished I could convey to him that things would eventually work out. I wished I could reassure him that the pain and confusion would not last forever, and that with honesty, effort, and love, even the deepest wounds can heal. As I cleared the dishes after dinner, I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I looked older, more mature, but also happier. I had faced one of the most challenging experiences of my life and come out the other side stronger and wiser. I knew that life would continue to throw challenges our way, but I also knew that we now had the tools and the strength. I assisted with clearing the dishes after dinner. I caught sight of my reflection in the window. I looked older, more mature, but also happier. I had faced one of the most challenging experiences of my life and come out the other side stronger and wiser. I knew that life would continue to present challenges, but I also knew that we now had the tools and the strength to face them together as a family. That night, as I lay in bed, I felt a sense of gratitude wash over me. I felt grateful for second chances, for the power of forgiveness, and for the resilience of the human heart. We had walked through fire and emerged not unscathed, but unbroken. As I drifted off to sleep, I felt, for the first time in a long time, truly at peace.